Okay, hello and welcome to another episode of Hiring and Inspiring. Today's guest is James Dallison. James is a fairly recent connection, I'd say, in the last couple of years, a guy I connected with on LinkedIn. He's a very successful and very experienced sales professional, sales leader, entrepreneur, and also a fellow expat living down under in Australia. So I'm looking forward to catching up with James, providing him an opportunity to talk about his success, talk about what he's done in his career, an opportunity for him to reflect on how he got there and how he did what he did, and what he can maybe attribute to that. Maybe talk a little bit about, shoot the shot, all things sales, and maybe talk about the future as well. So James, with that introduction, mate, welcome to the show. How you getting on?
Oh, Joe, I'm glad we got this done, and thank you for the very kind introduction. I think we'll probably find that it's a lot different to that, which is going to be the fun bit, I expect. But yeah, no, excited to be here and looking forward to answering some questions and chopping it up a bit, mate. So yeah,
Perfect. So I would love to start with probably the role in your background, which really caught my eye. And it's a long tenure you had, 6 years, I believe it was. 6 years of guided education where you came on board, correct me if I'm wrong, first sort of feet on the ground salesperson from the business and grew the team into a thriving, profitable business, took on people overseas, and delivered a lot of success from what I understand. So with that role, how do you sort of overall reflect on that period, that role, when you sort of look back on it, and what's your sort of overarching feeling about that time?
it's kind of one of those ones that makes me like itch a little bit. Like it taught me a lot. I would say my career in sales had been like, you see those memes or those posts on social media. It's, the iceberg under the water, or the jotting around trip. And that's very much been my career. I kind of never really focused on anything and been a little bit lazy. And actually I was in the middle of it wasn't a career break because I hadn't had enough of a career to have a break then, but I was looking to follow my passion, which we might get a chance to touch on later, around presentation and clothing and that kind of thing. But I was in that world after 7 or 8 years in my first sales roles, and my friend, associate, long-term collaborator on a few different things had said, I'm going to introduce you to someone. I already knew the person, and he had started this business and they needed a first revenue employee. So I wasn't the first employee. I was the first person to come in and sell it. First non-founder led sales, which is where so many startups find themselves, right? They find themselves in that position where they want to, or as a founder, and I've never been a founder in that regard, they want to find someone else who can deliver their vision to the market. Yep. And I think that confirms that they have a going concern as a business, and obviously that's what the investors like to see. So I came in with zero education experience, other than my own, but I had a bit of sales and tech experience. So it was a roller coaster, and I think and when you sent me the questions through, I was like, I learned a lot of what not to do.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. What not to do was try and do everything at once, so to get to the bottom line of where we're at, if we're going to do an arc of a business, and I'll do like a Breaking Bad type thing where you tell everyone what happens, is that business actually failed in the end. It did get acquired. We did split the divisions of the business from the content and the operations into two different companies, and they were acquired by two different companies as well. But we failed as an organization because we didn't have enough processes in place, and we didn't have enough retention of customers. So, and reflecting on that is, yes, we raised money. Yes, we created some revenue, but we weren't creating long-term revenue. We weren't creating predictable revenue. So we blagged it, basically, to want of a better word. We didn't know what we were doing at that level, but we had a great product. We had passion. We had work ethic, and we had a good team. So yeah, we did have. I'm probably undermining it a little bit.
Yeah,
we did have an amazing journey, and in different countries, and lots of great people.
it sounds like it mainly about the learnings that you look back on, like what maybe things you can use for future roles, or the not necessarily the mistakes, but the things that, what you say, what not to do was the standout from that time.
Yeah, there's a book called by a lady named Gillian Tett. She's an anthropologist, but she talks about, it's called Anthrovision. If you want to stick it on the link or whatever, it's quite a good one. It's really interesting. I think she works for the FT, but she's a professor and academic as well. And anthropology is the study of human behavior and diversity. But what she talks about is it's the studying of when they're looking at new civilizations in the world, and they find them, or they find these villages that have not been exposed to the modern world. They look at what they don't do as a bigger indication of how different they are. And so when I look back on that now, it was all of the things that we didn't do that now help me with where I'm at now, in a leadership position, in a sales, as an individual contributor, as a human being, as a potential entrepreneur. So it was all of the things that we didn't do then. And then now I look back and think, oh, well, if we'd have only just done that, if we'd have only just done this. And so it makes me have a lot of, I'm in awe of these young men women who come in and do startups so early, because they've just got that opportunity to fuck it up, and bleep that, sorry, but to quickly. And I think we kind of doubled down a little bit, and we all thought this was going to be the big ticket, and it wasn't, but it was an amazing experience, and it's put me in good stead for roles that I've taken since.
Why is it, do you think, that you don't realize it at the time, the mistakes you're making? Like, why is it only in hindsight that you kind of go, like that's what we should have done? Like,
that's the $69 million question, right? That's the question for any young person, any old person. It's like, I wish I'd have known that when I was younger. And I suppose they learn it, the younger you understand that, the better. But also, I think that's just the human condition, right? It's the, having the ups and the downs, and it's all very cliche, but when you're in it, you can't see the wood from the trees. So you have advisory boards, that's what happens in startups. You have advisory boards, but unless that advisory board is on the ground with you, or they're from the same industry, or they've done it before, then I have a conflicting opinion of advisory boards. So if you've got someone who's not their first rodeo, that's great. But if they have never done it before, it's hard to learn. So we started off with just a handful of schools through the founder, and then the pandemic hit about a year after that. So we built the product alongside those handful of schools, which is really important, obviously. And then the pandemic hit, and what was already a global problem around the need for teacher training, and I probably should have said this earlier, is the product was an online professional development tool. So it was a content play, but also had a software as a service element where you could accredit your teaching staff at any educational institution, mainly K-12, but a little bit of higher ed, where you could accredit your potential employees or your existing employees with UK teaching qualifications. And UK teaching qualifications outside of the UK are the number one desire. So, and that's because educational institutions are trying to attract paying customers, parents, particularly in the private school sector internationally, and they want to say, well, our teachers are accredited by the UK education system. Now, you can't do the full what's called a QTS, which is qualified teacher status. You need to have a UK university degree, and you need to be face-to-face. But you can accredit them up to that point. And that means you can then come to the UK to get that qualification, which was harder to do. What you can probably tell is that whole idea around getting someone who's to become qualified as a teacher is quite inefficient and requires the institutions to perhaps move resources around internally to accredit, to observe, to support the training of a teacher whilst they're in the class. And so you've got, in lots of Western societies, people in the classroom who don't know how to teach because there's such an acute need for teaching staff. Now, of course, the pandemic hit, that changed dramatically, and the schools were closed, but they still had to deliver learning, and they still had to deliver a transformation to the students, from even if they were a 5-year-old to an 18-year-old. So, and that required a totally different way of pedagogy, right? The science of learning is pedagogy. And so that had to change very, very quickly. The bottom line is that the pandemic gave us that boost to get people aware because the problem was there. But so then they started searching for a solution much more vigor than they normally would. So we got a lot of traffic to our site. We acquired customers very, very quickly who were like, oh, well, I still need to do my teacher training days. I still need to support my staff. But I can't do it face-to-face anymore. So we actually partnered up with a face-to-face organization whose business just plummeted, really well-respected company. So we then took all of their content, put it onto our platform. And that was the first year, basically, of us then taking that content to market, iterating it, getting feedback from the client and understanding, okay, you have the content now, great. There's lots of online courses. There was before the pandemic, there is after the pandemic, but now how do we ensure that this content delivers the transformation that you want to do? And so the 3 years after that was when we started to build the team, and we started to change from like a just one-to-one sales thing to a partnership strategy, but also where we had the cross-border teams, because we needed to ensure that we were generating enough leads to satisfy, the revenue plan, the playbook, the metrics, the indicators of what was required to deliver the money to the investors, and enough to keep the cash flow going, but then also to ensure that we were getting the feedback from the customer. So that was when we changed from just doing I came on, did sales for a year, got a few schools, brought on a couple of reps, but then we decided to do we had a BDR team in the Philippines of 6, I think, and they were just, hitting the phones. And then we had basically AEs, BDMs in the UK. And then we had customer success in China and in the UK. And that was just to ensure that everything was flowing through, because the majority of our customers were coming from international schools in those markets.
When you started to grow and take on those people and build the team out, were they reporting to you? And was that sort of your first taste of management or leadership in a sales capacity?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and it was something that I had no experience and no training in. And I think a lot of managers end up doing that. I did then get some training later on, and shout out to the Sales Impact Academy. Paul Fifield was the founder, was the CEO. Another guy named Pete Crosby, amazing. You've probably seen Pete. He's quite big on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But I did a training course with those guys on Sales Impact Academy, and it was amazing. And it's definitely changed my mindset and my career potential. So, but at the time, Joe, we didn't know. Again, we were just running by the seat of our pants. We knew we needed to generate a certain amount of leads. We had that, revenue ops kind of idea in our heads of what are our leading and lagging indicators? I was previously in the marketing space, but we brought a marketing person on. So, what were the channels that were generating the necessary traffic? What was our organic stuff doing? So we were trying to be big boys, but it was messy. But what we knew is we had a good product, and when they came onto the product, they loved it because they were getting in the short term what they needed, which was, and even if they were saying, we've got individuals who are currently training, that was enough to differentiate their institution as a shining light, as better than the next, and all these schools were just scrambling around to ensure that they didn't lose their students. So we had the good product, but I had no sales experience. And you know what it taught, sales management experience, you know what it taught me? It just taught me to be a good human, just to be a good human being and just fall back on your emotional intelligence and your instinct. And that's something that I've basically built my whole life on, right? And I think I just got lucky in that came instinctively became what I did. And I was like, look, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I do know if someone's struggling. I do know if someone is a certain type of personality that might not fit with the rest of the team. I do know that what I might need to say to a certain person that would motivate them, that might not necessarily be financial. It might be about a family thing, and being able to pick up on those, unsaid things. And that goes back to that anthropology piece. It was the things that people weren't doing in that initial instance was like, oh, that person's not doing that. That's weird because everybody else is doing that. So what's happening? And so it taught me a lot about just be the human element, really. And then when I did the training about 18 months later, we were able to start like systemizing it.
Yeah, that reminds me of your post. I think fairly recently it was like be a human today. That's all that matters, or something along those lines.
Yeah, and look, this is of no knock to anyone who's hustling, who's out there, like building a business, and the pressures that come with in a world that is so, we are under pressure as a society now. For it's first world problems, right? Oh, my mortgage rate's high, my groceries are high. We're living in a beautiful country, 1% type thing, but people are under pressure, and I just think sometimes you can forget that. And I've found that my success in sales has always come when I'm just a human, and that could be from just clocking that now's not the right time, or it's a Friday afternoon, let's just leave it, or it's a Monday morning, EQ stuff. Good sellers have an eye, have an ear, have a nose, have an instinct for a deal, right? And that comes down to obviously knowing your product and your customer and all of that stuff, but really it's about knowing the human that you're talking to. And so that post was just, sometimes just forget all the work stuff and just be a human being, and the universe tends to put back some good stuff if you do that.
Yeah, and that's how you're remembered as well. I always think people don't, this is a bit of off topic, people don't remember too much your performance against target that year or whatever, or they remember how you treated them. They remember how you left them, how you made them feel in said moment. And that's more of maybe a leadership thing when you're managing people. What do you think about that?
It's a tough one. Like I'm still learning. I'm not extensively experienced in it, but I am extensively experienced in the human condition and like learning from people, and older, younger. It's probably something we could maybe chat about later, but there's like a reverse mentorship thing that I've been getting involved in, which has been so helpful. Just talking to people who are like 15 years younger than me.
Tell me about that. Yeah.
So typical mentor is a younger person and an older person, or a more experienced person and a less experienced person. And a friend of mine who works at quite a senior level in the UK government, he's not a civil servant, so to speak, but he's in the Parliament and the digital change space in the Parliament. And he went, Oxford Business School and that kind of thing, and said what they're doing is getting younger people to talk to older people who aren't experienced, who don't have a career behind them, who might not even be in the same space, but just to talk to them about what life means to them, and just as a way of staying relevant. And I couldn't promote it more. I think it's amazing, and I think anyone should try and do it. And there's a lot of also, there's mutual benefits, right? There's still a young person out there who's getting a more traditional mentoring experience. Yep. So, it's just something that I think is worthwhile speaking. And I've forgotten what the bit before, because I've gone off on the tangent.
More just being human, just being
yeah. I think like that was where I was going to go with it. Is I'm not that extensively experienced, but what you learn is you can't be something to everybody, right? In management, so there has to be accountability, and there has to be that line, and I've probably failed in doing that before, where I've perhaps tried to be everybody's friend and relied too much on that human element, and that I can be your mate, or I can get my hooks into you, I can get under your skin in a positive way to understand what makes you tick. But sometimes, and that was what happened when we got to 15 sales, customer success, revenue employees, or whatever you want to call it, was that we needed accountability. And also that was like a cultural thing with having a cross-border sales team. And so certain, culturally, these people were different to what people were like who had careers in England or had careers in China. And so that was really challenging. And that was another reason why we started to struggle later on, because people need different things. And you are basically tied to the bottom line at the end of the day, right? We had investors, we needed to retain, and what was happening, I think a lot of software as a service companies are now experiencing, is it's cheaper to keep a customer than get a new one. And we learned that pretty hard, that the cost of customer acquisition just skyrocketed, and we didn't have enough structure and process for our lead generation to do that, to keep the cost down. So therefore we had to retain, and retaining the customer required a lot of resources that we didn't have. They needed more of a consultative thing, and we didn't have that, and we couldn't justify hiring people at that time in the UK who had the experience to do it. So we went out to perhaps less experienced people in cheaper marketplaces for human resources, and it just it didn't work.
How do you feel then your leadership has evolved since, that first getting sort of thrown in the deep end with no training, winging it, as you sort of say, to where you are now, or, the future, the leadership roles you've had since? How do you feel you have evolved on that front since then?
I've learned that, again, that accountability piece is really important, and drawing the line between you and your team. But everybody's different, so it always just goes back to that human element. If the business have this is sales, right? So it's very, salespeople are, and look, you feel free to edit this, salespeople are like racehorses, right? You have to keep them going to a certain level. Me included, as an individual contributor, I always have a carrier quota in my sales teams. It's like they're like racehorses. You just keep them focused, and keep their head and the cap, and that's what's required. If I was managing a team of account managers, or if I was managing a team of designers or engineers, I think that would be very, very different. So, but with sales, it's about ensuring that you manage up to your boss to ensure that the targets are achievable, and that target is communicated clearly. So I've found that what I've learned is about what I do with my manager has the most direct effect on what I do with my team. That's what I've found. And I learned that the hard way, just from having good bosses and bad bosses. They were all great people, that's just my side of it.
But you've been quite, I'd say, maybe this is the wrong word, like humble in this chat so far. You've been, almost critical of yourself at times, things you could have done better at. I'm going to provide you a bit of an opportunity to pat yourself on the back here. In the career you've had, the success you've been, the companies you work for, everything you've done. This is you reflecting a little bit, and this is you. What would you say if we talk about sort of character traits, we've touched upon a few already, I appreciate, but strengths that you sort of bring to the table, you as a salesperson, you as a leader, what do you feel that you have demonstrated, you have done well in your career?
Persistency, right? Like persistency in the face of challenging scenarios, from at the top level of a business, of understand, which you're as a leader, you're trying to hide from your team or shield your team from certain realities of running a business. This is in the startup world, where cash flow is so imperative, and things, keeping the lights on can become the only goal. But of course, at the same time, you're trying to build a sustainable business and do all the right things and keep your customers happy. So persistency to smile and deliver energy, right, is something that I'm pretty good at. But also persistency with the client base, right? This as someone who's in a sales role of some form, anyone that's in an account executive, or particularly, shout out to the SDR and BDR teams. If you haven't tried someone 10 times, you haven't tried them enough, right? And how many times will a BDR say, oh, well, I given up on this person, and then I called them again, and they were like, oh yeah, sorry about that, Joe. I've just, I've had a lot on. And that's just because everyone has their own life and their own, goals to achieve, personally or from a business perspective. So persistency just across the board. And I've failed in that in the past, of just kind of like not giving up, but just pivoting. And it goes back to that focus thing. It's like, if you have a vision and you deliver it and you focus on it, I most of the time, if you're talking to your customers while doing that, you will find the right solution. So that's been good. Just a hustle as a sales rep. Like, sales is about filling your pipeline and advancing your pipeline. Keep doing that, and you'll do okay, right? Like, bottom line, in my opinion, and I'll stand by that. So just a bit of hustle, and then I think that's about it. Like, I'm a people person, so I've built my life, my family, my friendship group, my opportunity to see the world. My career has just been built on people, and giving those people something that they need. Like, without it, that sounds kind of manipulative. It's not. It's just like, what is it that we can do for each other? Well, maybe it doesn't have to be a transaction. It has to be something where I'm going to actually do it for you. And that's always led to me having great relationships, and whether that relationship has led to a job or an opportunity, or traveling or whatever it is. But it never. I don't think the universe puts bad things back to you when you do that.
Yeah, it's about sort of, when you do that, being genuine in your approach, and you kind of almost, I'm not too into sort of karma and that kind of stuff, but like, building up a bank of goodwill almost.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
It does sort of come back to you if you do it.
The guy from Pavilion, the CEO of Pavilion, posted the other day. Oh, I've lost you, Joe.
Sorry, I think I just cut there. Sorry.
Yeah, I lost you a sec.
Sorry. Yeah.
You good?
Yeah, we're good. Sorry, my internet.
That was a great screenshot. We used to have a team. We used to have a thing in our guide where, because we did mostly remote, that we had a competition that who could screenshot the best freeze.
I hope you didn't get me then.
That was a good one. I should have got that.
All right.
Sorry, what were you saying?
I was saying, just building up a sort of bank of goodwill. You can almost, and it does come back to you.
I believe it does. Sam, the CEO of Pavilion, and I'm not a member of Pavilion, but I follow him, and a few of my network are. He put a thing about that. He was like, the one thing I know that will lead to success is just putting positive things out into the universe that will help you. And if you want advice from someone who's seen most things from a sales perspective, I feel like that's probably a pretty good person to follow.
Mate, we've talked about sort of the benefit of hindsight a little bit, and the stuff that you kind of, now you're where you are, it's like, oh, that was really obvious, or that, the things you kind of learned from your time in the past. If you could sort of go back to yourself 10, 15 years ago, starting out a little bit, younger version of yourself as a salesperson, as a leader, what would you tell that? If there was sort of like an overarching type, career lesson or something like that, what advice would you give younger James?
Probably me personally, just work a bit harder, focus on something that you enjoy, but maybe be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself about what you want to do and where you want to be, have a bit more of a plan. But again, it goes back to when we were talking at the start of the conversation, like, who's an 18-year-old person doesn't know that. A 21-year-old person doesn't know that. And life's juxtaposition is that we learn whilst we go. And there's this sort of social media driven like idea that you can be ahead of the game. And I feel like that kind of is counterintuitive because you don't learn properly. So a bit of focus, trust yourself, work harder. But, yeah.
Talk to me about your side project, your side hustle, Vincent. What's that all about?
I'll relate it to sales, right? Like presentation in sales is critical, whether that's a presentation you deliver online as a PowerPoint deck or whether it's a demo that you're delivering, little things like that, or it's whether you turn up to a meeting, looking the part.
Yeah.
I think there's been a push back towards after the pandemic towards more the presentation being more important to people, but there's been a huge amount of time just along with the tech boom of like, oh, it doesn't matter what you dress in, and I'm not a proponent of that. I've always been, I'm like, if we care about when we deliver a demo as a SaaS salesperson, to not have loads of tabs open, to not have bookmarks on your window, and to not have, to put our fake backgrounds on and all of that. So there we do care about presentation, but we do care about the emails that we put out to people and ensuring that it hits them straight away, because we care that, yes, you don't have enough time. So we're showing emotional intelligence, but we're showing that we care about you as a prospect because we're delivering something that's valuable to you straight away. So we do care. And all of that combined visually, goes back to like the old one that your mum and dad said, people have made up their mind before you've even opened your mouth, right? And so I'm just a big proponent of that. And as we said at the start of the conversation, before I started at Guide, I was working in a tailor's in London, off Savile Row, because I wanted to get some experience of that. I just spent years growing up buying clothes. My brother was, into Ibiza. I got my two older brothers. One was into Ibiza, so it was all quite fancy clothes and, like that kind of scene. And then the other one was like a raver. So I had this combination of, music and clothes that's where it all comes from, particularly in London. So I had many, many influences. My dad was from Liverpool. My mum was from London. So again, different influences from a clothing and cultural perspective. So I was always experimenting as a young person and experimenting badly, right? So I remember, there's a number of stories like going to like a drum and bass rave or some kind of rave, and I was dressed like I was going to some fancy club in the West End, and straight away I knew I was out of place. So I think, it's a tenuous link, but I believe that it makes a difference, right? Yeah. So Vincent is the reason why Vincent exists is because I think that retailers make it hard for men particularly, and for women, but it's a much more challenging thing for women because there's so many more options. But I think, and I don't dress as a woman, unfortunately, sometimes, maybe, you never know, is that it's hard for men to find the right clothes sometimes. Or they just turn around and go, I don't give it much thought. I've got no one to impress, or I don't care about it. But if you are lucky enough to wake up every morning and put clothes on your back, then you do care about it. And it does have an effect on the way we interact with the world. And so even if you say you don't care, I would say about 95% of those people do care. And so I just think that the retail environment, particularly with everyone shopping online and fast fashion and greenwashing, sustainability and all that, it's just challenging for blokes to find something that they like. And that doesn't necessarily mean dress like this, dress like that. It means dress the way you feel comfortable for where you live. What's the weather like? What do you do for a living? What color are your eyes? All those things that if you go into a shop, 95% of them are just going to go no. And that time in that tailor's, I learned really quickly that when a guy would come in and go, I want a suit, and you started to say, what do you want a suit for? Or what, are you just going to wear this for a wedding, or are you thinking about using it for work too? Or have you thought about this? Or I want this color suit. Oh, well, have you been told that might not be the best color for you, and this is why? Or have you been told that this material might be better for you because you've just told me you travel a lot for work and this material doesn't crease? These things that just most people don't care about, and so I get that because who's got the time? But Vincent is about putting that information in people in a way that's really easily digestible and not changing it, not expecting anyone to know it themselves, and giving them confidence to make clothing purchases as a result. And at the moment, it's just me putting advice out to the universe, but there is a tech platform in the background.
Okay.
that consumers could use or retailers could use to engage with their customers in that way that I've just described.
And it's something you're clearly passionate about, given how you just
My
described it to me
tirade.
there. Is it something that's do you find that easy to work on that project because you're so into it?
I do, but it's also not. It was like when I built it, and I've had a co-founder who helped me a lot with it, but he now isn't involved in the day to day.
Yeah.
And just did the classic, like, I built before I really knew what it was. You hear that about startups, like the lean startup. Yeah. It's like you don't build until, and so I kind of did that because it was like the pandemic and I was bored, and so I built it, and then the feedback was like, well, this isn't that great. But we knew we did get a few people using it, and the core feedback was like, I just find it hard to find the right thing, or I end up buying clothes I don't normally wear, or I find stuff. So at the start it was easy, but then it's become harder. Also, I've got 2 kids, like my kids are young, and we have also emigrated from London over. Probably underestimated the transition into different work environment in Australia. So it's been challenging in the last couple of years, but I think more because we've just been transitioning ourselves. But as I say, I am in a bit of a break after finishing a contract. So I'm putting things out to the universe. I'm calling in some favors. I'm calling in favors from that relationship bank that you mentioned. So yeah,
that does lead me nicely onto my next question. What do you think the future holds for you, and sort of even not necessarily what a role looks like, but in your career, what sort of goals do you have left? What do you still want to achieve?
Oh, look, I'm not even, I'm nowhere near. I actually was chatting to a really cool guy, and he was like, oh, you kind of want to be retired by the time you're 50, don't you? And I was like, well, that would be nice, right? But I think I would die of boredom. And, my granddad's 95, and I know the reason why he's still around is because he doesn't sit on his arse all day. He's up and about. So, so much more. And really, like I said, I think I personally feel my career has just always been a bit like, so perhaps to find that next long-term role, which is why I'm taking a bit of time to find the right thing. I was, another mentor of mine was telling me about, he said, this was after I finished Guide. He said, why don't you just go back into an IC role, right? Go and find a good company, carry a quota and just deliver, and he goes, you can make good money. So that was what my aim was. And then because in tech, particularly in educational tech, it's quite niche. So I was getting pulled back into leadership roles. And I don't want the stress of a leadership role. It's amazingly satisfying. But I think I've got enough stress with the kids, and they're very young. So I'm getting them to, that path through that phase. So the next stage is take some time, find the right role, find the right company. If it is leadership, it would have to be something very, very focused. But I was also thinking about maybe coming out of education, like ed tech, from a K-12 perspective. But I think that might be quite challenging. It was a question I asked you off camera, was, are companies considering people outside of their core industry? And from what I've heard from conversations I've had is that's probably they're a bit risk adverse to that. So definitely looking for a new role, but I am working hard on the side hustle, and also just spending some time with the family. I'm going back to London in a few weeks, so going to go and see some people, my family, and taking it easy.
Very good, mate. One final question for you, my typical closing question. Why do you do everything you do? Why have you worked so hard in your career? Why do you work in sales? It's around, the idea of success. What is success to you? And that can be personal, professional. How do you, which way you want to take it in your life? What is success? What is a successful life?
At the moment, just, this space and time, I think it would just not thinking I should have done that. I think that's where I'm at personally now. It's like, I don't want to look back and go, oh, well, you worked so hard to get there, you should have done this, or you were chasing X when really it was about Y. So not chasing stuff and thinking I should have done something that I'd worked towards, and just trusting my instinct, like being yourself, right? So that's where I'm at, but also just being a good dad and a good husband.
Yeah.
Maybe seeing my mates for a crazy holiday every couple of years. Chance.
Agreed. That's success as well to me. Love it. James, thank you very much for joining me today. Really enjoyed that chat. Everything you shared there. Plenty of gold in there, plenty of wisdom that I think anyone listening will take, a couple of things away from. So really appreciate you sharing everything and coming on and having a chat to me today.
Thanks,
James.
Joe.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Cheers, mate.